Hello and welcome, or привет и добро пожаловать to the 3D Blu-ray bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where we exclusively look at 3D Blu-rays, not to review the film, but to almost entirely focus on the quality of the 3D on offer, with just a short comment at the end about the film itself. And today we're looking at the 2013 Russian film Stalingrad. This has got an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1, and it was shot in native 3D. It always used to be a promising sign for me, a seal of quality, being filmed with 3D cameras rather than being post-converted into 3D, so I was excited to see how well Stalingrad lived up to its stereoscopic promise. The film is topped and tailed by a sequence in Japan in the aftermath of the 2011 earthquake, where Russian rescue workers are trying to save a German trapped in the rubble, and there are some quite nice pieces of 3D in this sequence. It begins with a plane flying over a tree here with the blossom falling towards us, which is all quite pleasant, and it's a nice start, and some of the shots of the girl waiting to be saved use 3D well. This is one of those shots that doesn't really make anything like as much sense of its space when it's viewed flat, so the 3D really does bring meaning to the shape of this place, and it amplifies its claustrophobic nature. Something else in this opening Japanese sequence is the debris floating in the air, and that's something that we see a lot of across the whole film, and it really is the filmmaker's go-to effect when it comes to making the 3D effective. You can't really see it very clearly in these 2D stills, but in 3D it does look very good. As well as ash, there are other airborne particles that show off the 3D, like the embers in this shot, and again it's difficult to see them in a 2D still here, but they make for great 3D in the film. Also, this is a pretty visually stunning sequence, as you can see, and knowing the Russians, I'm going to assume that this isn't digital trickery, but that they really did set these guys alight. So it's certainly awesome imagery, but the 3D in this sequence is only impressive because of those embers. The burning soldiers themselves don't really have much depth to them. As far as pop-out shots go, this is a rather sombre and serious film. It's certainly not what you'd class as a fun action war film. I guess that's not the sort of film that's really made these days, and pop-out shots would maybe seem a little bit out of place in this film, perhaps a little bit too vulgar for the subject matter, and I get the feeling that that's what the filmmakers thought anyway, as there are virtually none of them. The trails of smoke in this brief shot do noticeably emerge from the screen, but it's just about the only point in the film where anything does come out of the screen. By way of demonstrating the degree to which pop-outs are off the table here, this is a film with an awful lot of guns, rifles, pistols, machine guns and tank barrels, but we never see any of them poking out of the screen. Possibly the closest the film comes to doing that is in this shot as the boat comes towards the camera, but it moves on beneath the camera rather than straight towards it, so it's not a classic gun pop moment. So like I said, this isn't exactly a fun film, so guns poking out of the screen would have probably been regarded as a bit tasteless. I certainly don't have a problem with that, but it does obviously reduce the opportunities for strong 3D quite a bit. And like this aeroplane here in 2D might lead you to think that it's going to be popping out of the screen, but it isn't. It stays in positive parallax, and again it's a nice enough shot, but it's just not great 3D. And none of the long-distance shots have anything in the way of hyperstereo about them, which means that they always basically look flat, which is fine, as that's how they'd look in real life, and I can't complain about that, but it does mean that they're not of much interest from a 3D point of view. This shot of the film's main location is flat, although the camera pulls back here in one of the film's many sort of steady and slow camera moves, and the 3D view is then created as the new foreground takes its place, so actually maybe this was quite a clever shot after all. But if you have a look at these shots, the film is packed with scenes like this, all of which to me to be staged and framed with 3D in mind, and seeing them here in 2D you can maybe imagine how effective they would look in 3D. These are also beautifully composed for top quality 3D, but unfortunately pretty much always fail to dazzle. The 3D in this film feels to me like it's very natural and tasteful, but it totally avoids being showy, so you could call it subtle, and maybe my tastes aren't quite refined enough for that sort of thing, but to me it's just weak. Now, as ever, I absolutely respect the director and the stereographer's choices, and they're choices that I've no doubt were given a lot of thought, and these are all very smart people who know exactly what they're doing and they know what effect they're trying to achieve, and they were obviously more than well aware that the 3D could have been cranked up several notches, but it was their carefully considered opinion not to do that, and this is the film they chose to make, so I respect their decisions, but what it means is that the film is filled with very mild 3D, which for me is particularly frustrating, as these designs often look like its compositions are textbook designs for 3D. Looking at these stills, you can imagine how good the 3D might look, like the lamp hanging down here seems so obviously like it'll have a strong 3D effect, but none of these shots really deliver much in the way of strong depth. Certainly there is some depth, and apart from a handful of long distance shots, the film never looks flat. There's always a degree of depth present, but it's just never very much. There's a featurette on the Blu-ray called, I think, Stereoscopic Stalingrad, where the stereographer, a fellow called Matthew Blute, talks about his beam splitter and the rig's ability to wind down the interaxial to a tiny amount, which is where it looks to me like they've set it for rather too much of the film. Like I say, the film does always look like it's in 3D, and if you immediately switch to seeing scenes from it in 2D after watching it in 3D, the actual flatness of 2D versus the film's mild 3D is still massively apparent. And I'd definitely always pick 3D, even when it's as mild as this, over 2D, but I wouldn't dream of using this film, for example, to demo the capabilities of 3D to anyone curious about the format. In fact, I think I'd hide it away in case they wanted to see it, because it really isn't a showcase for strong 3D, and it could lead them to wonder why anyone's ever excited about it in the first place. Whilst it does a great job with the ashes and embers, there are a couple of scenes when a bunch of papers are thrown in the air, but on both occasions the paper is in the background of the shot, so it's got virtually no depth to it. So both of these moments feel like missed opportunities to me. And on the subject of missed opportunities, complaining about the binocular shot in films is something that'll never get old for me. So here's a fellow using a pair, but as is usually the case, the view we see through them has nothing to do with the real world view that you'd see when looking through binoculars. Whilst they have put those tiny distance marker lines into 3D space in front of the view itself isn't a hyperstereo, it's barely even in 3D really, and there are several sniper scenes in the film, and the view down the scope is actually accurate because it's obviously only going to be two-dimensional in real life, you're just looking with one eye, and they accurately place the crosshairs here on the same plane as the view in sight, so very correctly it's in 2D, but very uninteresting from a 3D point of view, of course, although to be fair, there are some scratches on the glass that are clearly in front of the crosshair. But amongst these optical devices, the most frustrating sight was seeing these awesome looking massive interocular binoculars being used at various points in the film, but we never get a point of view shot of what they were pointing at, which could have been a chance for an excellent hyperstereo shot, so that felt like another missed opportunity again. Another area where it felt to me that the film's 3D wasn't all that good was in people's faces. They were virtually all very flat looking, which again, I'm sure that's how they wanted them to look, but you'll have seen faces in other films, including post-converted ones, having much more three-dimensional look to them than these sort of cardboard cutout faces here. Some of the film's stronger views include shots of rows of people, such as these two here, where the depth is quite effective, and certainly this one comes at a very harrowing moment in the film, so I like the fact that the 3D is doing its best job when the drama is at its highest point. There's another quite good view that we see a few times in the film, and it's this staircase shot. It's another one of the film's many compositions that lends itself really well to good 3D, and with this one it actually feels strong enough to actually appreciate it. Overall then, I'd class this one as having pretty mild 3D for the most part. It's certainly a beautiful looking film, the production design is excellent and the whole thing looks very authentic and artistic at the same time, if that makes sense, and the cinematography captures it all extremely well. The composition, as well as the style of filming, nice long takes without fast editing or shaky cam, plus a bit of slow motion during some of the action scenes, all should have really worked to 3D's benefit, just unfortunately it doesn't really seem to have happened that way. So a very quick word about the film itself. It focuses on a group of Russian soldiers holed up in a building during the Battle of Stalingrad, and also it focuses on the opposing German soldiers waiting to attack the building, and both of these groups each has a love interest, so the film does sort of shift towards melodrama quite a bit. There is plenty of action though, and like I said, the whole thing looks superb. It had a large budget, which looks like it's up there on the screen, and it manages to be quite powerful at times with some good emotional moments, although I'm not sure whether it was the barrier of the subtitles or cultural differences or maybe just the film itself, but I did find it slightly difficult to fully engage with all of the characters, and I also thought that the prologue and epilogue felt a little bit tacked on, going for the sort of Private Ryan approach, but maybe without achieving the impact that those scenes had in that film. As far as its native 3D goes then, ultimately I was disappointed with it. I can't imagine that anyone would cite this one as one of the great uses of 3D, but I'd always take weak 3D over 2D, especially when the film itself looks as good as this one does. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now, bye bye.